Welcome back! This time I'll combine this nice elm burr piece with an epoxy resin to make a stunning frosted wall clock. Stay tuned! First things first, I need to cut a manageable piece which fits the best with the size of the upcoming clock. I'm planning that it should be 30 cm in diameter. This burr is bark free already, so I brushed off all other loose parts. The surface is clean and is ready to be covered with color. Instead of using an epoxy resin with a pigment, I simply sprayed with a chrome spray paint. It may be that spray paint sealed the wood already, but I used epoxy resin and primed the whole piece to be 100% sure to avoid any potential bubbles in the casting later. While epoxy resin was curing, I made a very simple mold. A square piece of melamine was cut to a round base with a bandsaw. Then cover it with packing tape, which helps me to remove the casting from the mold later. Around the perimeter I used a polypropylene piece because I had it in my scrap pile and it won't stick to the epoxy resin too. To make the joint watertight, I sealed it with a regular silicone. Alright, time to mix some epoxy resin. I used a slow curing casting epoxy which is UV resistant and could be poured up to 10 cm deep. This is the same resin which I used in my epoxy LED night lamp. Full DIY build video is in the upper right corner. Well mixed and poured to the mold. Suddenly I was reminded that the wood isn't as dense as the epoxy resin and it floats. Somehow I forgot to glue the elm burr to the mold. Not a big deal, the situation was controlled by adding weight from above. Here is the beauty of the slow curing epoxy resin. All air bubbles disappeared naturally. It is so clear that it is very hard to tell how deep this pour actually is. 1 week later, the epoxy resin was rock solid and I removed it from the mold. I don't show anything new for surface flattening, just a simple jig and router sled with a straight cut bit. Made pass by pass until the unpainted wood surface was uncovered. Drilled a hole in the middle and used the pin to center the paper template. This template has 12 marks, which represents 12 hours. Mark those reference points on the surface and connect it with the line. To mill each hour mark, I made a simple jig for my palm router. The cut on the left will help to align and double check before milling each new hour mark. Clamping, milling, unclamping, repeat. When all 12 marks were done, I changed the router template to another. This one allows milling longer and wider hour marks on 3, 6, 9 and 12 hour marks by using the same router bit. With aluminum foil tape, I sealed the edge and with hot glue made a small dam around each mark. Epoxy resin has an annoying tendency of shrinking upon curing. This dam will allow a small overfill, which will compensate that potential sag. Mix some epoxy resin with a black pigment and fill all grooves. Here is visible that sag. If the overfill was too small, I will need to fill that spot again, or take off additional millimeters from the whole surface. Instead of working hard and sanding those overfills, I flattened them with the router sled. Cut the final 30 cm of diameter with a bandsaw because the mold was made a bit larger. Rough bandsaw cut marks were sanded with a disc sander and later on finished by hand with 220 and 320 grit sandpaper. Drill a hole for a shaft of clock mechanism and marked rough outer shape. With a palm router and straight cut bit, milled needed hole. And it is sanding time. I passed through various grids by starting with 80, 120, 180, 240 and finished with 320 grit. From 180 I often wipe dust from the surface during the sanding. This helped me a lot to avoid swirl marks on the epoxy surface. I call that a success. I added a small chamfer on the edge for a more aesthetic look. This is the same palm router which was used along the build, just attached to the DeWalt job site table saw. Very handy modification. Full DIY build video in the upper right corner. I was opening the oil can to apply finish, but then I realized the hanging hole is missing. And now, the grand reveal of the final look. I used Osmopolix oil for the finish. This is one of two most popular products used on epoxy projects by the maker so far. I used a small amount of product and well buffed into the surface. What's left? To assemble everything in their place. I use the cheap clock mechanism, but the silent one, which does not make that annoying ticking sound. I could make this build way faster by using CNC for surface flattening, milling all grooves and pockets. But I wanted to show that the same result could be achieved by using a few basic electric tools, some imagination, and few extra hours in the workshop. I hope this will be the right amount of inspiration to try it by yourself. Thanks for watching, and until the next time, bye!